Today I want to share with you something that happened to me on the 13th of August. I got up at 7:30, did my yoga, and had breakfast with my sister. We sat on opposite ends of the table. She had her toast with some nice Nutella on top, and I had my less colourful, albeit quite healthy, muesli bowl, or as she likes to call it, bird food. The chime from her phone came in loudly. It was time to see where she will be spending the next 3 years of her life. She was elated. She got into the university she had dreamed of and the course she resonated with. And as an older sister, nothing could top how proud I felt at that moment. I saw a spark grow in her eyes. It lit the whole room, and boy was this joy infectious. It was like she could see her entire future right in front of her, all her hard work rewarded. But later on in the day, this joy quickly faded. She was locked in her bedroom, consoling her friends, as they had just missed the mark to get into their dream universities. For them, dozens of questions, thousands of worries was all that was circling their minds. Of course, I admit this is quite normal. Not everyone gets into their first choice, or maybe even has to try again the next year. Perhaps they weren't on their A game during exam day. It happens to the best of us. But 2020, we saw something different happen. 2020 was the year where we weren't only battling against a deadly virus, and unfortunately still are, or facing up to the climate challenge, and still are. But 2020 was the year when the news was filled with disappointed young adults, desperately looking for answers, and for someone to blame. And at the other end of this all was an algorithm. An algorithm which gave out inaccurate grade predictions. Arguably, this algorithm made life-changing decisions. Some may say mistakes. And those mistakes, they weren't just inappropriate grade predictions. No, those mistakes affect the future. The future hopes of wonderful careers and of colourful livelihoods of these young adults were crushed in a blink of an eye. And despite the wreckage this algorithm left in its wake, no one was quick to speak up to account for the instant damage, nor for the looming devastation that was going to happen from such a monumental mistake. That's when I realized that wasn't a day of celebration after all. Instead, that was a day of fear. And that day, we feared that the future would be like this. A future where the lives of our scientists, politicians, our budding artists, normal people alike would be at the mercy of these algorithms or super intelligent machines which we can't see, which we can't understand, and one whose mistakes we can't correct, where the only way out would be to react to it and beg for our lives to be spared. I mean, how can we possibly be living in a post-digital world when we are still so afraid of technology like this? And this fear stems from an inherent lack of understanding as to what it can do and how it operates. So how do we expect anyone to account for a system's actions when we can't look inside it and fully comprehend what it's even capable of? But I want to show you that we have an opportunity here to bridge that gap of understanding, an opportunity to make things right. And this can be achieved with a more transparent AI. And to show you just how invaluable this transparency can be, I've invited a special guest here today so we can really understand and deep dive into what went wrong back in August. Now, Ms. Algorithm, I'm only going to throw a few questions at you today. The first of which being, could you please tell us how you predicted an individual student's grades based off of an entire school's academic history? Okay, maybe, that was maybe too broad a question. So let's do something more specific. Could you please tell us how you accounted for individual differences between students when predicting their grades? Okay, right. let's change the subject then. Last question, this might be a difficult one, but could you please tell us how you accounted for biases that are so deeply embedded within society today when doing the grade predictions? Okay, you know what, maybe let's bring on the developer. They wrote the lines of code, so they understand what went on. Or perhaps we should call on the company. They should really answer our questions and they can share with us their entire vision of this algorithm. Or perhaps some of you may think that we should call on the government to take the stand. They should take the brunt of the questioning here today. I mean, they deployed it, so they should understand its consequences, right? Is it clear to you where responsibility lies? Now, this problem of accountability, ambiguity, and inherent lack of understanding begs for transparency. And this can be achieved with explainable AI. Now, explainable AI are essentially a set of tools and frameworks which unlocks a black box algorithm like the one that resulted in the exam result fiasco, and instead making AI transparent, making AI a source of insight. What does this transparency really mean? Well, it means that we can look inside the system, see what decisions it's making, how it's getting to those decisions, and why it's making them in the first place. And to put that in more pragmatic terms, if we had employed explainable AI back in August, well, that could have meant that the developer or even the government could have asked really important questions like, what patterns did you extract from the school's data set? And how did this influence the models that you later developed when predicting individual students' grades? And could you please tell us how we are going to account for biases that are embedded in our social fabric of today? And because we would have been able to see how and why these decisions were being made, we could then foresee how it could possibly go wrong in the future and organize a plan of action for the ripple effects it could cause. And these ripple effects are large and they span a great stretch of time. The students of 2020 and 2021 are marked. My sister, her friends, and the whole cohort not only face an oversubscription in university courses, but may also face further difficulties down the line when entering the workforce. With explainable AI, consequences like this may be easier to avoid. But with the same transparency, however, it seems like we have to give things up, things like privacies and intellectual property rights, all for the sake of AI innovation. So how can we keep that? And to answer that question, we need to take a page out of China's playbook. Now, China has much looser rules in privacy, but they are seen to be racing well ahead of this AI race. And that's partially because Chinese society embraces technology and welcomes it with open arms, and most importantly, gets on board with it at an incredible pace. And what that means is that huge amounts of data is readily available. And data creates fertile ground for algorithms to not only work really, really well and really, really accurately, but most importantly, it also gives room for people to innovate so much more. And this cycle of prosperity goes on, so on and so forth, until the next pivotal innovation. But this model can't work within the British or even European landscape. And in fact, we should never have to give up things we value, things like privacy and intellectual property rights, for innovation. And actually, explainable AI will help us to strike that balance. And here's how. The Swiss University ETH Zurich analyzed different AI guidelines and policies across academic institutions and private companies alike. Now, this study showed that these policies actually share 5 key values-based principles. And these are the ones we see here today. Now, given we have these principles to guide us by, this is where explainable AI comes in and unlocks that box for us, demystifies what was once quite impossible to understand. And with that, we can then properly assess to what extent these AI systems indeed adhere to these guiding principles. Now, who will implement this? AI research is fast-paced, and the digital landscape is always changing. Ultimately, an independent, third-party, trusted institution is needed. The missing piece of this puzzle is us, Atos. can Atos enable companies to overcome that fear and gain confidence in how they can responsibly develop AI? Can we help organizations unpack the black box mystery and gain valuable insights to propel them to new heights in innovation? A caveat here. This is a big responsibility. It's not a light task, but it's current. It's now. It's what the children of today, well, rather yesterday, and leaders of tomorrow need. We have the skills to take a neutral stance. We are tech agnostic and we are industry independent. And with all of that bundled together, we can then act as that broker of trust within distributed AI systems. So, about that fear when we look towards our post-digital world together. When we have explainable AI, we have the tools to overcome that fear. We get that valuable transparency. And this transparency means that we can gain insight into our AI systems and learn from it. That means we can correct mistakes sooner. Knee-jerk reactions like the government's back-and-forth response in August could be less probable. And by the very fact that we can understand AI better, hopefully we can learn from it, gain confidence in it, and work more collaboratively with these intelligent systems, and unlock new heights in innovation. Look, we have lots to learn from AI, so we shouldn't run away in fear of it, but rather take full advantage of it. Because as man and machine increasingly cohabit the same space, it is ultimately up to us to ensure that we understand each other and live in synergy with the very machines that we humans ultimately have created. Explainable AI will unlock new heights in human innovation, and it will unlock that more hopeful and still incredibly human post-digital world.